At my son's wedding, I leaned down to kiss the bride's cheek during the receiving line. She pulled back, her smile never faltering, and whispered through gritted teeth, "You're not really family anymore." The words hit like ice water, but her performance was flawless. The guests saw only a radiant bride embracing her new father-in-law. That moment shattered something I thought was unbreakable, but it also set in motion a chain of events that would expose truths no one saw coming. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The chapel bells of St. Augustine were still echoing when Helena Cartwright became my son's wife. I should have felt joy watching Caleb say his vows. But all I could think about was the conversation from 3 months earlier when she'd made it clear that my presence was more obligation than celebration. "Your father doesn't really fit our vision," she'd told Caleb while I stood in the kitchen doorway, supposedly out of earshot. "Can't we seat him somewhere less prominent?" I'm Donovan Reed, and I've spent 30 years building custom furniture with these hands. Calloused palms, fingers stained with decades of wood stain and varnish. Not the manicured hands that belonged at Helena's country club reception, apparently. After my wife Helena died 4 years ago, Caleb was all I had left. We'd grown closer through the grief, spending weekends in my workshop where he'd learned to sand maple and join oak the way his grandfather taught me. But Helena changed all that. Slowly, deliberately, she began rewriting the story of who belonged in Caleb's life. The receiving line moved like a slow-motion nightmare. Helena's parents, the Cartwrights, owned half the commercial real estate in Millfield. Their guest list read like a who's who of old money and new influence. I recognized judges, city council members, and the kind of people who summered in the Hamptons. When my turn came, I approached with the same quiet dignity Helena had always admired. Helena's whispered words, "You're not really family anymore," were delivered with surgical precision, timed perfectly between camera flashes and congratulations. But she underestimated something. She didn't know about the letter in my jacket pocket, the one that had arrived just 2 days before the wedding. She didn't know about the phone call that had changed everything, or about the reason why Colonel Morrison kept glancing in my direction with what looked like recognition. Some secrets take 30 years to surface. Some truths wait for exactly the right moment to rewrite everything you thought you knew about family, respect, and the true measure of a man's worth. The reception was just beginning, and Helena Cartwright had no idea what was coming. The Grandview Country Club sparkled under crystal chandeliers, each table set with china that cost more than most people's monthly rent. I found my assigned seat at table 12, tucked in the back corner near the kitchen doors. The placement wasn't accidental. I pulled out my phone and stared at the photo Helena had taken in our workshop just months before the cancer took her. Caleb, barely 16, holding up the jewelry box we'd crafted together for his girlfriend's birthday. His smile was genuine then, proud of the dovetail joints he'd mastered after weeks of practice. "Dad taught me everything I know about working with my hands," he'd told that girlfriend. Now, watching him at the head table in his $1,000 tuxedo, I wondered when he'd forgotten those lessons. Helena and I had raised Caleb in a modest 2-bedroom house on Oakwood Street, where neighbors borrowed sugar and kids rode bikes until dark. After Helena's funeral, I threw myself into my work, building custom cabinets for kitchen renovations and handcrafted dining sets that would outlast their owners. Each piece carried a promise, quality that couldn't be bought, only earned through patience and skill. When Caleb introduced Helena 2 years ago, I tried to see what he saw. She was beautiful, educated, poised, but there was something calculating in the way she assessed our home, noting the worn furniture and outdated appliances with the subtle disapproval of someone measuring worth in square footage. "Your father's very authentic," she'd told Caleb later, not realizing I could hear from the porch where I was sanding a rocking chair for the neighbor's new baby. The word authentic dripped with condescension, like I was some quaint artifact from a simpler time. The first real clash came when they announced their engagement. Helena insisted on the country club reception, the designer dress, the photographer who charged more than I made in 3 months. When I offered to contribute what I could, she'd laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, Mr. Reed, that's sweet, but we have it covered." The Cartwrights understand the importance of maintaining standards. As if the love Helena and I shared, the home we built, The son we raised with our own hands somehow fell short of her family's measuring stick. I touched the letter in my jacket pocket, the one that had arrived with the Department of Defense seal. 30 years late, but perfectly timed. The dinner was a masterclass in subtle humiliation. Helena moved through the reception like a general commanding her troops, ensuring every detail reflected her vision of perfection. When it came time for toasts, she made sure the microphone found its way to all the right people. Her father, her college roommate, her brother who'd flown in from Switzerland. I waited. Traditionally, the father of the groom speaks, but Helena had restructured tradition to suit her preferences. During the main course, she approached my table with Caleb in tow. Her smile was radiant for the cameras, but her words were surgical. "Mr. Reed, I hope you're enjoying yourself back here. We thought you'd be more comfortable away from all the formality." She gestured toward the head table where crystal glasses caught the light, and conversation flowed in practiced elegance. "Actually," I said quietly, "I prefer authentic company anyway." Her eyes flashed, but she recovered quickly. "How wonderful that you're so adaptable. Caleb tells me you work with wood. So artistic." The dismissal in her tone was unmistakable. She made furniture, craftsmanship sound like finger painting. "I build things that last," I replied. "Things with integrity that can't be bought, only earned." Helena's smile tightened. "Well, isn't that precious? Very old-fashioned values." She turned to Caleb. "Darling, we should check on the cake-cutting schedule." But Caleb hesitated, something flickering in his eyes as he looked between us. For a moment, I saw the boy who'd spent hours in my workshop, who'd learned that real quality came from patience and pride in your work. "Dad always said craftsmanship was about character," he said softly. Helena's mask slipped for just a second. "Of course, sweetheart. Character is so important." The way she said it made clear she thought I lacked exactly that. Later, during the cake cutting, she made her power play. As servers distributed slices, she took the microphone. "Before we continue our celebration, I want to acknowledge how grateful we are for everyone's presence tonight. Family means everything to us." Her gaze swept the room, lingering on the Cartwright relatives and prominent guests. "To those who truly belong here, who share our values and vision for the future, thank you for making this night perfect." The exclusion was artful, devastating. She never mentioned my name, never looked in my direction, but every guest understood the message. I was furniture, necessary but unremarkable, functional but forgettable. I felt the letter crinkle in my pocket and thought about 30 years of silence, about classified missions and brotherhood forged in fire. Some truths wait for exactly the right moment to surface. That moment was coming. The following weeks brought whispers from unexpected places. Mrs. Patterson from the hardware store mentioned how Helena had complained about Caleb's father's situation while ordering custom curtain rods. The bank teller, Sarah, quietly told me Helena had asked about trust funds and inheritance laws, specifically whether a deceased spouse's assets automatically transferred to children. At Murphy's Diner, where I grabbed coffee most mornings, the conversations grew more pointed. Judge Morrison's wife, Catherine, approached my booth one Tuesday. "Donovan, I need to tell you something." She slid into the seat across from me, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by concern. "Helena visited my husband's office last month. She was asking about guardianship laws, about how to legally distance adult children from unfit parents." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. "Unfit?" She claimed you had anger management issues, financial instability. Said she was worried about Caleb's future if something happened to you. Catherine's eyes were sympathetic but firm. "Thomas knows better, of course. We've known you since Helena was alive. But Helena was building a case, Donovan. Documentation." That afternoon, I received a call from my insurance agent. Helena had inquired about my life insurance policy, specifically whether Caleb was the beneficiary, and if spouse preferences could override parental designations after marriage. The pattern became clear: systematic, calculated, methodical. Helena wasn't just excluding me from family gatherings. She was constructing a legal and social framework to erase me entirely from Caleb's life. I drove to Riverside Cemetery where Helena rested under an oak tree we'd planted together 20 years earlier. Her headstone was simple, elegant, bearing the inscription, "Beloved wife and mother, her love lives on." "She's trying to steal our son," I whispered, placing fresh wildflowers by the marker. "Everything we built together, everything you taught him about loyalty and family. She wants to erase it all." The wind rustled through the oak leaves, and I could almost hear Elena's voice. "You raised him better than that. Trust the foundation we built." Walking back to my truck, I noticed a black sedan parked near the cemetery entrance, the same sedan I'd seen outside my house 3 times this week, outside the diner twice, and in the country club parking lot during a delivery I'd made to their kitchen contractor. Helena wasn't just building a case against me. She was having me watched, documented, cataloged like evidence in a trial where I wasn't allowed to defend myself. I pulled out my phone and called the one person who might understand the gravity of what I was facing. "Judge Morrison? It's Donovan Reed. I need to tell you something about your colleague's daughter-in-law, and I think you need to know what she's planning. Some battles require intelligence gathering before the first shot is fired." 3 weeks after the wedding, Caleb appeared at my workshop door. He looked older somehow. The boyish enthusiasm I remembered replaced by something heavier. His designer clothes seemed out of place among the sawdust and wood shavings. "Dad, can we talk?" I set down my sandpaper and gestured to the old bench where we'd shared countless conversations over the years. He sat carefully, avoiding the stains that came from a lifetime of honest work. "Helena says you've been spreading rumors about her." His voice was cautious, diplomatic. "She showed me some things. People saying you've been asking questions, making accusations." I studied my son's face, searching for the boy who'd once trusted me completely. "What do you think, Caleb? Do you believe I'd spread rumors?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know what to believe anymore. She says you're having trouble accepting that I've moved on, that you're trying to cause problems in our marriage. And what does your heart tell you?" For a moment, his careful composure cracked. "My heart tells me something's wrong, that I barely recognize myself anymore. But Helena says that's normal, that marriage changes you, helps you grow beyond your childhood limitations." "Limitations?" I repeated the word slowly. "Is that what she calls the values your mother and I taught you?" Caleb looked around the workshop, at the half-finished rocking chair for the Hendersons' new granddaughter, at the kitchen cabinets that would grace the Martinez family's first home, at the photo of him holding his first handmade jewelry box. "She says I need to focus on our future, not get stuck in the past." But his voice lacked conviction. "Son, let me ask you something. When you built that jewelry box, what made you proudest? The expensive tools we used, or the fact that you created something beautiful with your own hands?" He was quiet for a long time. "The fact that I made it myself, that it came from effort and care. That's who you are, Caleb. That's what your mother and I raised you to value. Not the price tag, but the heart behind it." Tears gathered in his eyes. "She wants me to stop visiting. Says it's not healthy for our marriage if I keep living in the past." I reached over and squeezed his shoulder, feeling the tension there. "What do you want?" "I want to remember who I am," he whispered. "But every time I try, she shows me all the ways I could be better, more successful, more worthy of the life she's offering." "Caleb." I waited until he met my eyes. "You were already worthy. You've always been worthy." He broke then, shoulders shaking as years of conditioning crumbled. "Dad, I think I made a mistake, but I don't know how to fix it without destroying everything." "Sometimes," I said gently, "you have to be willing to break the wrong thing to build the right one." When he left that evening, something had shifted. The seed of doubt Helena had worked so hard to suppress was finally beginning to sprout. Helena arrived at my house the next evening like a storm front, her heels clicking against my front porch with military precision. She didn't wait for an invitation, pushing past me the moment I opened the door. "We need to discuss boundaries," she announced, surveying my modest living room with undisguised contempt. "Caleb came home upset after visiting you yesterday. This manipulation has to stop." I closed the door quietly and turned to face her. "What manipulation? Don't play innocent with me, Mr. Reed. I know exactly what you're doing. Playing the wounded father, trying to guilt Caleb into choosing between his past and his future." I told him the truth about who he is. She laughed. sharp and cold. The truth? The truth is that you're a relic from a simpler time, clinging to outdated values that have no place in the modern world. Caleb doesn't need to build furniture to prove his worth. He has opportunities you could never provide. And what opportunities are those? The chance to forget where he came from? To be ashamed of the parents who raised him? Helena stepped closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Let me be clear about something, Mr. Reed. Caleb is my husband now. My family, my responsibility, my future. You are a chapter that's ending, whether you accept it gracefully or not. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. She pulled out her phone, swiping through what looked like photographs and documents. I have evidence of your increasingly erratic behavior, questioning neighbors about me, harassing business associates, making wild accusations about my character. I remained calm, though my fists clenched at my sides. Asking questions isn't harassment. It is when those questions are designed to undermine my marriage and my reputation. She held up her phone, showing me photos of myself at the cemetery, at the diner, at the hardware store. I have documentation of your stalking behavior, your attempts to manipulate people against me. Helena, why are you so afraid of people knowing who you really are? Her mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing something desperate underneath. I'm not afraid of anything. I'm protecting my marriage from a bitter old man who can't accept that his son has outgrown him. Caleb hasn't outgrown anything. You've convinced him to amputate parts of himself to fit your narrow definition of acceptable. Better than living in this. She gestured around the room. This shrine to mediocrity. Caleb deserves better than wood shavings and working-class nostalgia. I walked to the mantel where Elena's picture sat beside photos of Caleb through the years. Birthdays, graduations, proud moments building things together in the workshop. You know what scares you most, Helena? It's not that Caleb might choose me over you. It's that he might remember who he really is and realize that what you're offering isn't worth the price you're asking him to pay. She moved toward the door, her composure cracking. Stay away from my husband, Mr. Reed, or you'll discover just how effectively I can remove obstacles from my life. Your husband, I called after her, is my son, and sons always remember their father's voices no matter how much noise tries to drown them out. She slammed the door behind her, but I could feel her fear lingering in the air like smoke. I called Judge Morrison first thing the next morning. We'd served together in Desert Storm, and I knew his judgment was sharper than his judicial robes suggested. When I explained Helena's systematic campaign to isolate Caleb, his response was swift and clear. Donovan, she's building a case for what we used to call hostile takeover, but instead of a company, she's targeting a family relationship. I've seen it before in divorce proceedings. That afternoon, we met at his downtown office. Morrison had done his homework. Helena Cartwright's behavior follows a textbook pattern of psychological manipulation, he said, spreading documents across his desk. Financial investigation of your assets, character assassination through community gossip, isolation techniques designed to separate Caleb from his support system. What's her endgame? Complete control. She wants Caleb's total emotional and financial dependence, with no competing loyalties to complicate her authority. Morrison leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. There's something else, Donovan. I made some calls about the Cartwright family. Helena's not just wealthy. She's desperate to maintain that wealth. Her father's company is hemorrhaging money, and they're leveraging everything to maintain appearances. So Caleb's not just a husband. He's a financial asset. Exactly. His inheritance potential, his earning capacity, his social connections. It's all part of a larger strategy. I felt pieces clicking into place. That's why she was asking about my life insurance, about inheritance laws. Morrison nodded. She's playing a long game, Donovan, and she's willing to destroy your relationship with Caleb to protect her investment. We spent the next hour crafting a strategy. Morrison had connections throughout the legal community who could document Helena's behavior patterns. We identified witnesses who could testify to her systematic isolation tactics and character assassination attempts. But the real breakthrough came when Morrison mentioned something unexpected. By the way, did you ever receive that commendation letter from the Pentagon? The one they've been trying to deliver for 30 years? My blood went cold. What commendation letter? Morrison smiled grimly. The one recognizing your classified service during Operation Desert Shield. Apparently, the paperwork got buried in bureaucracy, but someone recently discovered your unit's activities were far more significant than originally reported. He pulled out an official Department of Defense envelope. This arrived at my office yesterday. Addressed to you. They couldn't locate your current address, so they tracked down your military contacts. I opened the letter with trembling hands. The words swam before my eyes. Extraordinary valor, under enemy fire. Classified rescue mission. Saved 12 American civilians from hostile territory. Awarded the Defense Superior Service Medal. 30 years of silence. 30 years of being dismissed as just another blue-collar worker. 30 years of keeping classified missions locked away while Helena convinced everyone I was nothing more than a simple furniture maker. She has no idea, I whispered. Morrison grinned. None whatsoever. The question is, are you ready to remind everyone exactly who Donovan Reed really is? I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my jacket pocket, next to the one that had started everything. Some secrets are worth keeping. Others are worth revealing at exactly the right moment. The phone call came at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. Caleb's voice was strained, exhausted. Dad, something's happened. Helena's in the hospital. I was dressed and driving before he finished explaining. Apparently, she'd collapsed at a charity board meeting. Stress and exhaustion overwhelming her carefully maintained composure. The doctors were keeping her overnight for observation. At the hospital, I found Caleb in the waiting room, still wearing yesterday's clothes, his hair disheveled. He looked up when I entered, relief flooding his features. Dad, thank God you came. I sat beside him, and for a moment we were just father and son again, the way we'd been when Helena was sick, when the world felt too heavy for either of us to carry alone. How is she? Stable. But, he ran his hands through his hair. She's been taking anxiety medication for months. High doses. The doctors say it's affecting her judgment, her behavior. The pieces began falling into place. Helena's increasingly erratic behavior, her paranoid surveillance, her desperate attempts to control every aspect of their lives, all symptomatic of someone battling their own demons while trying to maintain perfect appearances. Caleb, has she seemed different lately? More suspicious? More controlling? He nodded slowly. Ever since the wedding, maybe before, she questions everything I do, everyone I talk to. She has lists of people she considers safe and others who are threats to our future. And where do I fall on that list? You're labeled primary threat, he admitted quietly. She has files, Dad. Actual files with photographs and documentation of your activities. She's convinced you're trying to sabotage our marriage. I thought about the letter in my pocket, about Morrison's investigation, about 30 years of classified service Helena would never understand or respect. Son, what if I told you that everything she's convinced you to believe about me, about who I am and what I've done with my life, is only part of the story? Caleb looked at me with tired eyes. What do you mean? Before I could answer, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Helena's parents appeared, followed by what looked like half the country club board of directors. Mrs. Cartwright swept toward Caleb with theatrical concern. Darling boy, how are you holding up? This stress can't be good for your health either. But Mr. Cartwright's attention was focused on me. His eyes narrowed with familiar disapproval. Mr. Reed, I'm surprised to see you here given Helena's concerns about your influence on Caleb. I'm here because my son needs support, I replied evenly. Your son, Mrs. Cartwright interjected, is part of our family now. Perhaps it would be better if you let us handle this crisis. The dismissal was subtle but clear. Even in a hospital waiting room, even during a family emergency, they were still trying to erase me from Caleb's life. But this time, something was different. This time, I could feel the weight of truth in my pocket, ready to rewrite everything they thought they knew about the simple furniture maker who wasn't worthy of their respect. Actually, I said quietly, I think it's time everyone learned exactly who they're dealing with. Caleb looked at me with curiosity. The Cartwrights with condescension. None of them were prepared for what was about to happen. Helena was discharged the next morning, but the fragile facade of her perfect life was cracking visibly. Dark circles rimmed her eyes. and her usually immaculate appearance showed signs of strain. When she saw me in the hospital lobby, her reaction was immediate and visceral. "What is he doing here?" she demanded, though her voice lacked its usual commanding tone. "Helena, please," Caleb said gently. "Dad came to help." "Help?" She laughed bitterly. "He's the reason I'm in this position. His constant interference, his manipulation tactics, the stress of dealing with him is what caused this breakdown." But something unexpected happened. Dr. Martinez, Helena's attending physician, overheard the conversation and approached our group. "Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing. Are you Sergeant Donovan Reed?" The question hit like lightning. Helena's face went white. The Cartwrights exchanged confused glances. Caleb looked between the doctor and me with growing bewilderment. "Yes," I said quietly. Dr. Martinez extended his hand with genuine respect. "Sir, I need to thank you. My father was Carlos Martinez, one of the civilians you rescued during Desert Shield. He never forgot what you did, carrying him 2 miles through hostile territory with a bullet in your shoulder." The hospital lobby went silent. Helena's mouth opened and closed without sound. "My father told that story until the day he died," Dr. Martinez continued. "How Sergeant Reed and his unit risked everything to save 12 American contractors trapped behind enemy lines. Said you were the kind of hero who never talked about being heroic." I felt every eye in the lobby focused on me. Caleb's face showed a mixture of shock and dawning recognition. "Dad?" he whispered. "Is this true?" Before I could answer, Helena found her voice. "This is ridiculous. He's a furniture maker, not some war hero." "Doctor, you're obviously mistaken." Dr. Martinez looked at her with professional calm. "Ma'am, I'm not mistaken. My father carried Sergeant Reed's picture in his wallet for 30 years. He turned back to me. Sir, the family has always hoped to thank you properly someday." The moment stretched taut as a wire. Helena's carefully constructed narrative was unraveling in real time. Everything she'd used to diminish me, my modest home, my working-class profession, my simple lifestyle, suddenly looked different when viewed through the lens of a man who'd chosen humility over recognition. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Caleb asked, his voice breaking. "Because," I said softly, "some service is its own reward. I didn't rescue those people for recognition. I did it because it was right." Helena rallied, desperation sharpening her voice. "This changes nothing. Even if this story is true, it doesn't excuse your current behavior, your attempts to undermine our marriage." But as she spoke, more people in the lobby began to take notice. A security guard approached respectfully. "Sir, did I hear correctly? You're the Sergeant Reed from the Martinez rescue?" When I nodded, he smiled broadly. "My unit studied that mission in training. Textbook example of valor under fire." The murmurs started then, rippling through the lobby like waves. Helena's face grew paler with each recognition, each expression of respect directed toward the man she'd spent months portraying as unworthy of her family's acknowledgement. "I need to leave," she said abruptly. This is too much." As she hurried toward the exit, I saw something I'd never seen before. Helena Cartwright in full retreat, her armor of superiority finally cracked beyond repair. Caleb remained beside me, staring with new eyes at his father. "What else don't I know about you?" he asked. "Nothing that changes who we are to each other," I replied. "I'm still your dad. You're still my son. The rest is just details." But we both knew that wasn't quite true. Some details change everything. The confrontation came 3 days later at the country club's annual charity gala. Helena had insisted Caleb attend despite her fragile state, claiming it was important for maintaining their social standing. I wasn't invited, of course, but that was about to change. Judge Morrison arrived at my house that evening wearing his dress uniform, his chest decorated with ribbons that told stories of service and sacrifice. "Ready for this, Donovan?" I looked down at my own dress uniform, carefully preserved in Helena's cedar chest for 30 years. The insignia and ribbons felt heavier now, weighted with meaning that had been buried too long. As ready as I'll ever be. We drove to the country club in Morrison's official car, the one with government plates that commanded respect from valet attendants and security guards. When we entered the ballroom, conversations gradually quieted as people recognized Morrison's authority and tried to place the decorated soldier beside him. Helena spotted us immediately from across the room. Her champagne glass trembled in her hand, and she moved quickly toward Caleb, whispering urgently in his ear. But he wasn't listening. He was staring at me with wonder and recognition, finally seeing his father clearly. The evening's program included speeches from various dignitaries and donors. Helena had positioned herself prominently, ready to bask in the social spotlight that validated her worth. But when Morrison approached the microphone for what was supposed to be a routine thank you to sponsors, the trajectory of the evening shifted dramatically. Ladies and gentlemen, before we conclude tonight's festivities, I have the honor of recognizing someone whose service to our country has gone unacknowledged for far too long. Helena's face went ashen. She tried to catch the event coordinator's attention, to signal that this wasn't part of the planned program, but it was too late. 30 years ago, during Operation Desert Shield, 12 American civilians found themselves trapped behind enemy lines. The rescue mission launched to save them was classified until recently, and the soldiers who risked everything to bring those people home never received the recognition they deserved. Morrison's voice carried across the silent ballroom like a judge's gavel. One of those soldiers is here tonight. He left the service quietly, never speaking of his heroism, and built a life of humble service to his community. He raised his son alone after losing his wife, teaching values of integrity, craftsmanship, and dignity through honest work. All eyes turned toward our table. Helena's glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the marble floor. Some of you know him as a furniture maker, a quiet neighbor, a devoted father, but the United States Army knew him as Sergeant First Class Donovan Reed, recipient of the Defense Superior Service Medal for extraordinary valor under enemy fire. The applause began slowly, uncertainly, then swelled into something approaching thunder. People rose to their feet, including judges, business leaders, and social elite who had dismissed me as unworthy of their acknowledgement. Helena remained seated, her face buried in her hands. Morrison continued. Sergeant Reed carried wounded civilians through 2 miles of hostile territory, refusing medical evacuation until every person under his protection reached safety. He saved 12 lives that night, and he did it without expectation of reward or recognition. I stood slowly, accepting the weight of attention I'd avoided for 3 decades. Caleb rose beside me, tears streaming down his face, pride and shame warring in his expression. This is the man, Morrison concluded, that some people considered unworthy of respect, unsuitable for family inclusion, too simple to understand the complexities of modern success. The silence that followed was deafening. Then someone began to clap. Then another. Soon the entire ballroom erupted in sustained applause that seemed to go on forever. But the most beautiful sound was Helena's sob of recognition. Not of my service, but of her complete and utter miscalculation. The revelation rippled through the ballroom like a seismic shift. Helena sat frozen while her carefully constructed social world reorganized itself around a truth she'd never imagined. The man she'd dismissed as a simple furniture maker was being honored by judges, business leaders, and politicians who suddenly saw him through entirely different eyes. Judge Morrison returned the microphone to the podium, but the program was effectively over. Guests abandoned their tables to approach me, their expressions ranging from awe to embarrassment. These were people who had witnessed Helena's subtle dismissals, her casual cruelties, her systematic exclusion of the unsuitable father-in-law. Mrs. Patterson from the hardware store was among the first to reach me, tears in her eyes. Donovan, I had no idea. When Helena was in the store complaining about your situation, I should have defended you. You had no reason to know, I said gently. I chose not to talk about it, but the shame in her expression reflected a deeper truth. Helena's poison had spread through our community, turning neighbors against a man whose only crime was living modestly, despite extraordinary service. Dr. Martinez appeared with an elderly man I didn't recognize. Sergeant Reed, I'd like you to meet someone. The old man stepped forward with tears streaming down his weathered face. Sir, I'm Carlos Martinez Sr. You saved my life 30 years ago. The reunion was overwhelming. This man had spent 3 decades wondering if his rescuer survived, while I'd spent the same years believing my service was just doing my job. We embraced while the ballroom watched, and I felt 30 years of buried pride finally surface. But the most important eyes were Caleb's. My son stood transfixed, seeing his father clearly for perhaps the first time since Helena entered our lives. "Dad," he whispered when the crowd thinned slightly. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let her make you seem small when you're this? Because who I was in the war isn't as important as who I am as your father. I wanted you to respect me for the man who raised you, not the soldier who came before." Helena finally found her voice, though it was shaky and desperate. "This doesn't change anything. You still tried to manipulate our marriage, still interfered." "Helena." Caleb's voice was sharp, authoritative in a way I hadn't heard since he was a teenager standing up to bullies. "Stop." She looked at him with shock. For months she'd conditioned him to defer to her judgment, to trust her assessments over his own instincts. "You made me ashamed of my father," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "You convinced me that everything he taught me about integrity and character was somehow inferior to your family's money and connections. Caleb, please. You're overwrought." "No." He stepped closer to me, and I felt the gap between us closing after months of artificial distance. "You made me believe that love was conditional on status, that family was something you could upgrade like a house or a car." The Cartwrights approached then, their faces pale with the recognition of what their daughter had done. Mr. Cartwright looked at me with something approaching horror. "Mr. Reed, we had no idea. Helena never told us about your service record." "Would it have mattered?" I asked quietly. "Should a man's worth depend on his military decorations rather than his character?" The question hung in the air unanswered, because we all knew the truth. Helena had been willing to destroy a father-son relationship based purely on class prejudice and social ambition. Mrs. Cartwright touched her daughter's arm gently. "Helena, sweetheart, what have you done?" But Helena was beyond reasoning. Trapped in the wreckage of her carefully constructed narrative, she lashed out with the desperation of someone watching their world collapse. "You all act like he's some kind of saint, but you don't know him like I do. You don't see the manipulation, the way he uses guilt and sentiment to control Caleb." The accusation fell flat in the face of everything the room had just learned. Here was a man who'd kept extraordinary heroism secret for 30 years, who'd worked with his hands to support his family, who'd never asked for recognition or reward, being accused of manipulation by someone who'd systematically documented his daily activities and built legal cases to erase him from his son's life. "Helena," I said softly, "I think it's time to stop." But she was past listening. The truth had shattered her carefully constructed reality, and she was drowning in the pieces. The ride home was quiet except for the steady hum of Caleb's car engine. He'd insisted on driving me, needing the time to process everything that had changed in the span of a single evening. Helena had left the gala early, supported by her parents, her world restructured around truths she'd never imagined. "I need to ask your forgiveness," Caleb said as we pulled into my driveway. "For what?" "For forgetting who you are. For letting her convince me that the man who raised me wasn't enough." His voice cracked. "For being ashamed of the hands that built everything I treasured as a child." I turned to face my son, seeing Elena's eyes looking back at me with a mixture of pain and hope. "Caleb, love doesn't require perfect judgment. It requires the courage to recognize mistakes and make them right." We sat on my front porch, the same steps where he'd learned to tie his shoes, where we'd talked about his first girlfriend, where Helena had announced her pregnancy 28 years ago. The night air carried the scent of Mrs. Rodriguez's jasmine and the distant sound of the city settling into sleep. "What happens now?" he asked. "With Helena? With the marriage? That's between you and your wife. But whatever you decide it as the man your mother and I raised, not the man someone thinks you should be." He pulled out his phone, showing me the screen. "She's been texting since we left. Threats, apologies, promises to change, accusations that you manipulated tonight's events." He slipped the phone back into his pocket. "I think I understand now why she was so afraid of you." "Why?" "Because you represent something she could never control or buy. Authentic love, unconditional acceptance, the kind of relationship that doesn't require anyone to diminish themselves to be worthy." 3 weeks later, Caleb moved back into the spare bedroom he'd occupied through college. The divorce papers were filed quietly, Without drama or recrimination, Helena returned to her parents' house, seeking treatment for the anxiety and control issues that had driven her desperate campaign to remake Caleb's life. On a Saturday morning that felt like resurrection, Caleb appeared in the workshop wearing old jeans and a flannel shirt I hadn't seen in 2 years. "Mind if I help with that rocking chair?" he asked, eyeing the project I'd been working on for the Hendersons' granddaughter. I handed him the sandpaper and watched as muscle memory took over. His hands remembered the rhythm, the patience required to bring out the wood's natural beauty. "I missed this," he said quietly. "I missed us. We never went anywhere," I replied. "Sometimes we just get lost for a while." That evening, we sat on the front porch again, drinking beer from bottles and watching neighbors tend their gardens. Mrs. Patterson waved from her yard, no longer carrying the burden of witnessing cruelty unchallenged. The Hendersons' granddaughter rode her bicycle past, calling out hello to the men she'd always known as Caleb's dad. And Caleb, never questioning whether working with wood made them less worthy of respect. "Dad," Caleb said as the streetlights flickered on, "thank you for never giving up on me." "That's what fathers do," I replied, feeling Elena's presence in the gathering dusk. "We hold steady until our children find their way home." I touched the chain around my neck where Elena's ring rested beside my dog tags, 2 symbols of love that had outlasted every attempt to diminish their power. Some promises take a lifetime to keep. Some truths wait 30 years to surface. And sometimes, the simplest love proves stronger than the most elaborate schemes to destroy it. The rocking chair was finished the next week, delivered to a family who would treasure it not for its monetary value, but for the hands that shaped it, and the love that guided every cut, every joint, every careful stroke of sandpaper. That's how real families work, built with patience, strengthened by truth, and sustained by the kind of love that no amount of money or social pressure can break. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts about family, respect, and the true measure of a man's worth in the comments below.